Hello and welcome to this latest episode of Life Under Lockdown. And we're back across the Irish Sea today and delighted to welcome and chat with Fr Marius O'Reilly from the great city of Cork. Welcome, Father.
Thank you very much, John Patrick. Delighted to be with you. I've seen some of your videos and I think you do a great job, and thanks for having me on this evening.
No, absolutely. Thanks very much. That's really kind words. We've been wanting to speak to you for a while, obviously, given your involvement in the great movement Rosary on the coast, Rosary around the coast in Ireland. And we've been involved here with Antonia in Scotland. But what is interesting us is your work just now regarding this, this pandemic which is taking place. You're working in a hospital, and I just want to know, we are obviously rightly celebrating the work of the frontline workers all across the world who are treating this awful contagion, but sometimes we're not hearing sometimes in the mainstream media the stories of the priests that are involved. So what is it like being a priest on that front line?
So just by way of background, I suppose, I'm a priest chaplain in the Mercy University Hospital, which is a hospital in the centre of Cork City. So it's a very busy hospital. We were just through the flu season and looking forward to things easing off a little bit, because flu season is very, very hectic. And we have an A&E there in the centre of the city, so it's very, very busy. So I suppose when we heard about the COVID-19 pandemic, we were looking at pictures from China and Italy and just horrific things, really. And we were expecting, a hurricane to really hit. So there was a lot of fear in the hospital, I must admit, because people didn't know what to expect. And I think when people are outside of their kind of comfort zone, or when you're not sure what way things are going to go or how the future is going to pan out, and I suppose I might add, we never know how the future is going to pan out, but when we're in a time like this, there can be great fear. So I found as a chaplain, I mean, my average day would be going around visiting patients, and we'd have mass and rosary and things like that in the chapel and so forth. But I found, because there was so much media coverage, people were very, very afraid, and patient numbers started to drop. So the hospital actually became very quiet. A lot of people mightn't realize that, and I believe it's the case in most hospitals. So patients being afraid to come in meant that there were a lot of empty beds, which normally in the Irish healthcare system scenario, it's normally over capacity, and there's people on trolleys and so forth. So this was an extraordinary development. It meant people couldn't come in and visit patients. So a lot of patients were very, very lonely, and we were worried about patients that weren't coming in, who maybe needed urgent healthcare but were afraid to come in. So that is an ongoing concern. And I suppose my ministry changed in the sense that I started spending more and more time with staff. And I would spend time with staff anyway, be part of my role for patients and staff. But because they were so afraid, we started thinking, what can we do to help the staff and to encourage them? And so we developed various prayer initiatives. We had daily adoration, and it was interesting that the smell of incense started attracting people into the chapel as well, which was very interesting. Take note. And also we started doing this daily holy hour, and also handing out Psalm 91 to people. And they started reciting Psalm 91 every morning. And what was really encouraging is that people found great consolation in prayer. They found it very, very soothing. And it was just wonderful to see a lot of people turning to the Lord for that strength. That people, I suppose, stripped of their securities, realize that how frail and weak we are. And like St. Paul told us, that we're like earthenware jars, that when we fall to the ground, when the pressure comes on and so forth, we realize how vulnerable and weak we are. And another thing which was very interesting as well, John Patrick, was, I don't know if you saw it, but many people around the world began to put the image of divine mercy on their doors. As they put the Lamb of God on the door, like the Jews who put the blood of the Lamb on the doorposts before the Passover in Egypt. And so we started handing out images of divine mercy, and a lot of staff and nurses took them home and wanted to protect their families and so forth. So yeah, it's been a very unusual time. But it's now the new norm, let's say. I mean, COVID-19 is just part of our daily routine now. I go in and anoint patients and so forth. It's just part of what we do. I think the hardest bit was the before the storm arrived, and
Mm.
that uncertainty. And we kept on saying, it's like we're waiting for a hurricane to arrive here, and we just, we kind of batten down the hatches and get ready. We don't know exactly what's going to come, but that was probably the hardest bit of the whole crisis, I would think.
If you are anointing patients who have suspected COVID or dying of COVID, which may or may not be the case with yourself, but how are you dealing with that? It's easy saying you're a priest, you're a man of God, you're a man of faith, but we're also humans as well. And I guess that fear element might be there for some people. Do you have that element of fear?
Well, I suppose at the beginning, when you didn't know what to expect, I remember the first COVID-19 patient who came in was like a celebrity, and we didn't know how to interact and what to do. But once you've anointed a few, you realize it's similar to the flu. The flu is very dangerous, and a lot of people die from the flu. I think this year, 400,000 people have died from the flu. So when we're going in to anoint people with the flu, for instance, you have to take a lot of precaution, and you have to gown up, and you wear gloves and a mask and a special gown and so forth. With COVID, we do that as well, but we also put on eye goggles just in case the patient sneezes, because it can enter through your eyes. And then, of course, we would, make sure that we change the clothes and have a shower and so forth afterwards, because it can get into your hair. But I suppose, when you're working with nurses in particular, healthcare workers, cleaners as well, cleaners have to go into the rooms and they have to sanitize it and so forth. So when you're working with all these and you see everybody doing it, it's kind of great to be part of the team. And I suppose there was a bit of fear at the beginning when you're going in because of the unknown and the uncertainty, but it's just something I do pretty much every day now. And the people who work in ICU, like I'm in and out pretty quickly, but people who work in ICU can be with these patients for hours, 1 or 2 hours at a time. So my hat really goes off to them.
Yeah, it's a fascinating, kind of thing. Obviously, for people watching, there's different, scenarios in place in different parts of the world. Ireland I think, probably is a wee bit less affected than we are in the UK. So we have more restrictions in place. Certainly, I know that there's a lot of limitations on the last sacraments here. I'm pretty sure that some of them are being made available, but I think there's considerations made for the older priests as well, who are needing shielded because they're vulnerable and they're particularly at risk. How do you deal with afterwards, after you visited a COVID patient? Do you have to isolate yourself? I mean, obviously there are no public masses in Ireland at the minute. How are you navigating that scenario?
It's similar to the UK, but I think you're probably at another level, closer to Italy and Spain and the United States and China and so forth. Well, after you've been in with a patient, you have to gown off, so you have to take everything off inside the room because everything is infected, and you just come out wearing the mask, and then you take the mask off outside. You have to sanitize your hands very carefully, and you have to change your clothes, have a hot shower, make sure that you're well scrubbed as such, because it can get into your hair, as I was saying, and so on your shoes as well. So you have to be careful with your shoes. In China, they're covered head to toe, but we don't seem to have that here in Ireland. But we do have to be careful. But at the same time, I suppose I'm younger, and most of the nurses we have, etc., are younger, and we're not too afraid of actually contracting the virus, because most people, the vast majority of people, are absolutely fine with it. It's like a really bad flu. We've had even patients, John Patrick, in the hospital with a 103-year-old nun and a 93-year-old nun who had it, and they walked out.
Wow.
And we had a 96-year-old who had it. We've also had a couple of young people who have died because of underlying conditions or whatever. So it is something serious, but at the same time, when you're dealing with it every day, we probably have a different, more practical approach to most people who are, watching all these pictures on the news constantly and so forth. So you do have to take every precaution, but at the same time, these patients need our help. And I suppose just one point you made there, which is probably even of greater concern in Scotland, is probably the age profile of the priests. So if they're over 70 in Ireland, they're what we're calling cocooned. I don't know if you're using that word there,
No.
but it's not a great word, but that's what the government's using here. So they have to stay inside, and they're not allowed to, our bishops are saying that it would be prudent for them not to have contact exactly. But some younger priests then are volunteering to help out. But priests in our diocese, for instance, who have volunteered to help in nursing homes and so forth, they have to go through very careful training, and also we have to get them a lot of equipment, because once you wear the gown and so forth, you have to dispose of it afterwards. So it's I suppose it's like anything, at the beginning, when there's all this uncertainty, there was more fear, but when it's just something you're doing every day, it's just part of the role.
It's interesting, but how, as a priest as well, obviously we're talking about the physical threat, but as a priest, how are you spiritually with this? Because given that you are called to your flock, you're called to care for souls, you're called to bring souls and the sacraments to souls, without having public mass available, how has that affected you in your spiritual life?
It's been very, very different. I'm lucky, I suppose, that our church remains open in the hospital, because the hospital has decided, that it's not an issue for them. So people are coming into the church. I have mass every day, and it's beamed, live streamed to the patients. So I still have a kind of a congregation, but they're just not sitting there in front of me. But all that is very strange, and we do have daily adoration there as well. And a lot of people are coming to adoration who never would have come before. The numbers are still small, and I suppose that's important because of the social distancing and all that. But people are finding great comfort in the Lord. A lot of people asking me to pray for them, and I'm just finding my presence is very important too. And the fact that they see that I'm part of the team, and that I'm willing to do whatever they have to do, and that I'm not kind of too over concerned. I think that's important, because, as I said, most people who get this will be absolutely fine. I know people who've had it already, and they've been fine. And I suppose the mortality rate seems a lot higher than it is, because there's a lot of people walking around with this who are hardly affected, and yet they're not appearing on the stats in terms of people who are infected. So it makes it seem like the mortality rate is a lot higher.
Yeah, I don't know if you're aware of there's a trend just now in the UK where we have a lot of laity who are asking our bishops and priests to reopen our churches for private prayer. I'm sort of on the fence with that one, to be honest, because I think there's two aspects to it. I think the churches possibly should be open in a way that can be done safely, depending on the situation where that church is. Some are busier, some are quieter. I also think there's a growing mental health crisis in this country regarding this issue, and I think a lot of Catholics, people who weren't practicing before, are turning back to their faith and seeking comfort in the faith. But on the other hand as well, that I suppose the counter argument is that you want people to stay indoors in Scotland at the minute, given the high numbers, and maybe by opening a church it would encourage more people to leave. So it's trying to get that balance right. I really don't envy the bishops and priests in making that decision, but what would your view be in that?
Well, as you said, it's getting the balance, and it's very hard to know because the data keeps kind of changing. And I suppose when these initial decisions were made, there was possibly, I'm sensing maybe a lot more fear than there is now. I mean, a lot of people I meet, for instance, in the supermarket or whatever, I was talking to a young girl working in the supermarket recently, and I was telling her I worked in a hospital, and she was, fascinated by this. And I was explaining to her that even if she got it, given her age profile and that she's no underlying conditions and so forth, she would generally be okay. And she was amazed at that. She thought if she got this, she was going to die. So there's a kind of there's a fear out there, which I would just be concerned about. But it's to get that balance, as you say, and I suppose
I think it's interesting questions about what is essential services. That is the key thing here, because rightly we are looking after people's bodies by caring for their health, by shielding them, and also giving them access to pharmacy and shops. But there's a high risk of getting it in a supermarket as well. I would say a higher risk than a large church building where people are spaced out and praying over the course of a day, as opposed to standing in a queue. So the question for me, and the church maybe has to think about, is that yes, we're caring for people's bodies, but we're also body and soul. And I think that we need to really, really consider as well the effects this is having on people's souls. Yeah, you mentioned live streams. I think people are uptaking them in a very, very large number. We're seeing that from our national shrine in Carfin, and we're seeing it across the board. So again, I suppose it really boils down to the question, how does the church balance body and soul?
it's hard. I mean, one thing that we're looking at in Ireland at the moment is there's a comparison being made between Ireland and Sweden. And Sweden decided to not lock down everything, but to really emphasize the social distancing. And I think they've cafes still open and so forth, but you have to spread out, and they're very careful in that sense. I suppose the Nordic people are very kind of law abiding anyway by nature, aren't they? More so, I think the more south you go in Europe, the less we are. So maybe you could argue that it could work better there, but I think we're learning in Ireland that maybe, because we look at their death rates and the mortality rate and so forth, and it's around the same as Ireland. So our measures are not having a greater effect. Ireland is doing really badly in terms of the nursing homes. I believe we're the second worst country in the world in terms of nursing.
I think the UK might be first, I think.
Was it? Yeah.
I think it might be.
I
it's
think
very
we're
tragic
second.
scenario.
It could be. Yeah, terrible, because they're, these poor people are sitting ducks. So I guess as time moves on, you would think people going into churches would be relatively low risk. I would agree with you in that sense. I mean, we have off licenses open here. I mean, are they essential services and so forth? So I think in time it'll just become quite obvious what to do. But as you said rightly, I think it is difficult for the bishops because they have to try and follow what the experts are telling them, and at the same time the situation is changing gradually as well. So
yeah, and
it's a very difficult one.
What would, obviously there's people who are really struggling with this lack of access to the sacraments. What would you say as a priest to comfort them, given that this situation is, well, particularly in Scotland, has no real end in sight at the minute?
Well, I would say to not be afraid, and if you feel yourself fearful, to really turn to the Lord. That the Lord is allowing this to happen for whatever reason, and it is an opportunity for us. There's an opportunity in everything. There's a quote from Romans, St. Paul's letter to the Romans, where he says, all is ordered for the good for those who love the Lord. In the sense that the most important thing for us to be concerned about is loving the Lord. Stay close to him. I've seen it in my own life, because things are not as busy in the hospital. It means I've had time to do a lot of other things. And people are sharing similar stories with me that, they're praying the family rosary together now at night. They never had the time to do that. They're doing things together. They're reading a bit of scripture and so forth. So there's an opportunity in all this, I think, for all of us to listen to the Lord and try and understand what he's saying to me. Are there things I should be doing or things I shouldn't be doing? It is a real opportunity in that sense, because the engines as such have been turned off. So we're on a little kind of a retreat here. And I think to turn to the Lord, to try not to allow yourself to be afraid, to be over anxious, to be worried. That's not what he wants. But what is he saying to you and me in this time? And to just spend time in silence with him, read scriptures, pray the rosary, and please God, the churches and access to the sacraments will be available in due time.
Yeah, I think that's a great hope that will happen eventually. So thank you, Father, for talking to us today. Obviously, it's a privilege to speak to you from the great city of Cork. I've been there twice, and I'm hoping that once this is all over, I can return back to Cork. I've actually quite like Cove. Big fan of
yes, as the Americans call it, Cobb H. It's spelled COBH, so it doesn't make any sense.
And I've got to mention that. Obviously, I said before, I really do prefer Cork to Dublin, and I mean that. I really do. I think Dublin is too big, too touristy. I think Cork feels more authentic Ireland.
Yeah, good. We're very happy to hear that. We consider Cork as the real capital, so you'd go down very well here. And
another thing to improve my Cork credentials, Murphy's is far better than Guinness, and I'll say that right now.
Yeah, well, they used to have an ad, Murphy's, that like the Murphy's, the ad was like Guinness were not bitter or something. That was so it's a little bit sweeter.
Well, on that note, I'm looking forward to the day where I can go back to Cork and have a nice Murphy's. So thank you, Father, for your time, and God bless you.
Thanks very much, and keep up the good work. You're doing great work there, and it's great to see, and we need people like you in the church. So keep going.
Thanks, Father.
God bless you.
Thank you.